succeeded in moving the piano. Now, if we put this Chesterfield against the wall and move everything out of the room except the chairs, don't you think? Quiet. Hans, move these tables into the smoking room and bring a sweeper to take these marks off the carpet and... one moment, Hans. Josie loved giving orders to the servants, and they loved obeying her. She always made them feel they were taking part in some drama. Tell Mother and Miss Laura to come here at once. Very good, Miss Josie. She turned to Meg. I want to hear what the piano sounds like, just in case I'm asked to sing this afternoon. Let's try over This Life is Weary. Pum, ta-ta-ta, ti-ta. The piano burst out so passionately that Josie's face changed. She clasped her hands. She looked mournfully and enigmatically at her mother and Laura as they came in. This life is weary, a tear, a sigh, a love that changes. This life is weary, a tear, a sigh, a love that changes, and then goodbye. But at the word goodbye, and although the piano sounded more desperate than ever, her face broke into a brilliant, dreadfully unsympathetic smile. Aren't I in good voice, Mummy? She beamed. This life is weary. Hope comes to die. A dream, awakening. But now Sadie interrupted them. What is it, Sadie? If you please, Cook says, have you got the flags for the sandwiches? The flags for the sandwiches, Sadie? Echoed Mrs. Sheridan dreamily, and the children knew by her face that she hadn't got them. Let me see. And she said to Sadie firmly, tell the cook I'll let her have them in 10 minutes. Sadie went. Now, Laura, said her mother quickly, come with me into the smoking room. I've got the names somewhere on the back of an envelope. You'll have to write them out for me. Meg, go up this minute and take that wet thing off your head. Josie, run and finish dressing this instant. Do you hear me, children? Or shall I have to tell your father when he comes home tonight? And Josie, pacify the cook if you do go into the kitchen, will you? I'm terrified of her this morning. The envelope was found at last behind the dining room clock, though how it had got there, Mrs. Sheridan could not imagine. One of you children must have stolen it out of my bag, because I remember vividly cream cheese and lemon curd. Have you done that? Yes? Egg and... Mrs. Sheridan held the envelope away from her. It looks like mice. It can't be mice, can it? Olive, pet, said Laura, looking over her shoulder. Yes, of course, olive. What a horrible combination it sounds, egg and olive. They were finished at last, and Laura took them off to the kitchen. She found Josie there pacifying the cook, who did not look at all terrifying. I have never seen such exquisite sandwiches, said Josie's rapturous voice. How many kinds did you say there were, cook? 15? 15, Miss Josie? Well, cook, I congratulate you. Cook swept up crusts with the long sandwich knife and smiled broadly. Godbers has come, announced Sadie, issuing out of the pantry. She had seen the man pass the window. That meant the cream puffs had come. Godbers were famous for their cream puffs. Nobody ever thought of making them at home. Bring them in and put them on the table, my girl, ordered Cook. Sadie brought them in and went back to the door. Of course, Laura and Josie were far too grown up to really care about such things. All the same, they couldn't help agreeing that the puffs looked very attractive. Very. Cook began arranging them, shaking off the extra icing sugar. Don't they carry one back to all one's parties? Said Laura. I suppose they do, said practical Josie, who never liked to be carried back. They look beautifully light and feathery, I must say. Have one each, my dears, said Cook in her comfortable voice. Your ma won't know. Oh, impossible. Fancy cream puffs so soon after breakfast. The very idea made one shudder. All the same, 2 minutes later, Josie and Laura were licking their fingers with that absorbed inward look that only comes from whipped cream. Let's go into the garden, out by the back way, suggested Laura. I want to see how the men are getting on with the Marquis. They're such awfully nice men. But the back door was blocked by Cook, Sadie, Godber's man, and Hans. Something had happened. Clucked Cook like an agitated hen. Sadie had her hand clapped to her cheek as though she had toothache. Hans' face was screwed up in the effort to understand. Only Godber's man seemed to be enjoying himself. It was his story. What's the matter? What's happened? There's been a terrible accident, said Cook. A man killed. A man killed? Where? How? When? But Godber's man wasn't going to have his story snatched from under his very nose. Know those little cottages just below here, miss? Know them, of course she knew them. Well, there's a young chap living there, name of Scott, a carter. His horse shied at the traction engine, corner of Hawk Street this morning, and he was thrown out on the back of his head, killed. Dead? Laura stared at Godber's man. Dead when they picked him up, said Godber's man with relish. They were taking the body home as I come up here, and he said to the cook, he's left a wife and 5 little ones. Josie, come here. Laura caught hold of her sister's sleeve and dragged her through the kitchen to the other side of the green baize door. There she paused and leaned against it. Josie, she said, horrified, however are we going to stop everything? Stop everything, Laura? Cried Josie in astonishment. What do you mean? Stop the garden party, of course. Why did Josie pretend? But Josie was still more amazed. Stop the garden party? My dear Laura, don't be so absurd. Of course we can't do anything of the kind. Nobody expects us to. Don't be so extravagant. But we can't possibly have a garden party with a man dead just outside the front gate. That really was extravagant, for the little cottages were in a lane to themselves at the very bottom of a steep rise that led up to the house. A broad road ran between them. True, they were far too near. They were the greatest possible eyesore, and they had no right to be in that neighborhood at all. They were little mean dwellings, painted a chocolate brown. In the garden patches there was nothing but cabbage stalks, sick hens, and tomato cans. The very smoke coming out of their chimneys was poverty-stricken, little rags and shreds of smoke, so unlike the great silvery plumes that uncurled from the Sheridans' chimneys. Washerwomen lived in the lane, and sweeps, and a cobbler, and a man whose house front was studded all over with minute bird cages. Children swarmed. When the Sheridans were little, they were forbidden to set foot there because of the revolting language and of what they might catch. But since they were grown up, Laura and Laurie on the prowl sometimes walked through. It was disgusting and sordid. They came out with a shudder. But still, one must go everywhere. One must see everything. So through they went. And just think what the band would sound like to that poor woman, said Laura. Oh, Laura. Josie began to be seriously annoyed. If you're going to stop a band playing every time someone has an accident, you'll lead a very strenuous life. I'm every bit as sorry about it as you. I feel just as sympathetic. Her eyes hardened. She looked at her sister, just as she used to when they were little and fighting together. You won't bring a drunken workman back to life by being sentimental, she said softly. Drunk? Who said he was drunk? Laura turned furiously on Josie. She said, just as they had used to say on those occasions, I'm going straight up to tell Mother. Do, dear, cooed Josie. Mother, can I come into your room? Laura turned the big glass doorknob. Of course, child. Why, what's the matter? What's given you such a color? And Mrs. Sheridan turned round from her dressing table. She was trying on a new hat. Mother, a man's been killed, began Laura. Not in the garden, interrupted her mother. No. Oh, what a fright you gave me. Mrs. Sheridan sighed with relief and took off the big hat and held it on her knees. But listen, Mother, said Laura. Breathless, half choking, she told the dreadful story. Of course we can't have our party, can we? She pleaded. The band and everybody arriving, they'd hear us, Mother. They're nearly neighbors. To Laura's astonishment, her mother behaved just like Josie. It was harder to bear because she seemed amused. She refused to take Laura seriously. But my dear child, use your common sense. It's only by accident. We've heard of it. If someone had died there normally, and I can't understand how they keep alive in those poky little holes, we should still be having our party, shouldn't we? Laura had to say yes to that, but she felt it was all wrong. She sat down on her mother's sofa and pinched the cushion frail. Mother, isn't it really terribly heartless of us? She asked. Darling. Mrs. Sheridan got up and came over to her, carrying the hat. Before Laura could stop her, she had popped it on. My child, said her mother, the hat is yours. It's made for you. It's much too young for me. I have never seen you look such a picture. Look at yourself. And she held up her hand mirror. But Mother, Laura began again. She couldn't look at herself. She turned aside. This time Mrs. Sheridan lost patience, just as Josie had done. You are being very absurd, Laura, she said coldly. People like that don't expect sacrifices from us, and it's not very sympathetic to spoil everybody's enjoyment as you're doing now." "I don't understand," said Laura, and she walked quickly out of the room into her own bedroom. There, quite by chance, the first thing she saw was this charming girl in the mirror, in her black hat trimmed with gold daisies and a long black velvet ribbon. Never had she imagined she could look like that. Is mother right? She thought. And now she hoped her mother was right. Am I being extravagant? Perhaps it was extravagant. Just for a moment, she had another glimpse of that poor woman and those little children, and the body being carried into the house. But it all seemed blurred, unreal, like a picture in the newspaper. I'll remember it again after the party's over, she decided. And somehow, that seemed quite the best plan. Lunch was over by 1:30. By 2:30, they were all ready for the fray. The green-coated band had arrived and was established in a corner of the tennis court. "My dear," trilled Kitty Maitland, "aren't they too like frogs for words? You ought to have arranged them round the pond with the conductor in the middle on a leaf." Laurie arrived and hailed them on his way to dress. At the sight of him, Laura remembered the accident again. She wanted to tell him. If Laurie agreed with the others, then it was bound to be all right, and she followed him into the hall. "Laurie?" "Hello!" He was halfway upstairs, but when he turned round and saw Laura, he suddenly puffed out his cheeks and goggled his eyes at her. "My word, Laura, you do look stunning," said Laurie. "What an absolutely topping hat!" Laura said faintly, "Is it?" and smiled up at Laurie, and didn't tell him after all. Soon after that, people began coming in streams. The band struck up. The hired waiters ran from the house to the marquee. Wherever you looked, there were couples strolling in, bending to the flowers, greeting, moving on over the lawn. They were like bright birds that had alighted in the Sheridan's garden for this one afternoon. On their way to where? Ah, what happiness it is to be with people who are all happy, to press hands, press cheeks, smile into eyes. "Darling Laura, how well you look." "What a becoming hat, child." "Laura, you look quite Spanish. I've never seen you look so striking." And Laura, glowing, answered softly, "Have you had tea? Won't you have an ice? The passion fruit ices really are rather special." She ran to her father and begged him, "Daddy, darling, can't the band have something to drink?" And the perfect afternoon slowly ripened, slowly faded, slowly its petals closed. Never a more delightful garden party. The greatest success. Quite the most. Laura helped her mother with goodbyes. They stood side by side in the porch till it was all over. "All over, all over. Thank heaven," said Mrs. Sheridan. "Round up the others, Laura. Let's go and have some fresh coffee. I'm exhausted. Yes, it's been very successful. But oh, these parties, these parties. Why will your children insist on giving parties?" And they, all of them, sat down in the deserted marquee. "Have a sandwich, Daddy dear. I'm with the flag." "Thanks." Mr. Sheridan took a bite, and the sandwich was gone. He took another. "I suppose you didn't hear of a beastly accident that happened today," he said. "My dear," said Mrs. Sheridan, holding up her hand, "we did. It nearly ruined the party. Laura insisted we should put it off." "Oh, Mother!" Laura didn't want to be teased about it. "It was a horrible affair all the same," said Mr. Sheridan. "The chap was married, too. Lived just below in the lane, and leaves a wife and half a dozen kiddies, so they say." An awkward little silence fell. Mrs. Sheridan fidgeted with her cup. Really, it was very tactless of Father. Suddenly she looked up. There on the table were all those sandwiches, cakes, puffs, all uneaten, all going to be wasted. She had one of her brilliant ideas. "I know," she said. "Let's make up a basket. Let's send that poor creature some of this perfectly good food. At any rate, it will be the greatest treat for the children, don't you agree? And she's sure to have neighbors calling in, and so on. What a point to have it all ready prepared. Laura," she jumped up, "get me the big basket out of the stairs cupboard." "But Mother, do you really think it's a good idea?" said Laura. Again, how curious. She seemed to be different from them all. To take scraps from their party. Would the poor woman really like that? "Of course. What's the matter with you today? An hour or two ago you were insisting on us being sympathetic, and now—" "Oh, well." Laura ran for the basket.